Well, farmers want more labour. And farmers are talking about the Pacific Compact, where we have workers from the Pacific Islands and East Timor. They come into Australia as agricultural labourers, essentially. The Pacific Island countries are very, very keen for this kind of arrangement to be put into place. And it has been put in place in New Zealand. Canada has a similar arrangement. Australia is looking what happens to the New Zealand experiment. If things look right in the New Zealand experiment, this is a direction that Australia will take. But the Minister has also pointed out recently in relation to rising sea levels that Australia inevitably has the responsibility that if rising sea levels leave Pacific Island people without a land, then those people will be able to move to Australia. We're short of health professionals and various other professionals, paraprofessionals, and at the moment we use the temporary entry scheme, the so-called 457 scheme, to do that, to try and handle those problems. And if we had all of these workers, and everybody else who's here anyway, they'll demand more services, and hence more workers in retail, hospitality, personal services, etc. There's a multiplier effect with population. And the groups that we use a lot for those areas are foreign students and working holiday makers. The numbers of both of those categories, temporary residents of Australia, have risen very dramatically over the last 10 years. Somewhere in the order of a total of somewhere between 300 and 400,000 of those people in the country at any one time, and they're all allowed to work. Labour demand. Finally, rising living standards will create all kinds of new demands for labour, and the definition of living standard is that we can pay someone to do something for us. Now, looking at the other side, labour supply, Australia's labour force grew at close to 2% per annum between 1980 and 2000, and in many ways the economy is geared to labour force growth. It's going to have to learn to gear to a lower labour force growth, but we are geared to high growth. Due to the full entry, it grew fast because of the full entry of the baby boom generation into the labour force, and because of increased participation of women in the labour force, and finally from international migration. But the first two of these sources of growth will largely disappear from now on. Women's labour force participation rates can still go up a bit more, but not a lot. The baby boom, of course, is right, that's going to start leaving the labour force rather than joining it. The labour force is growing today at about 1.2%, and it's falling, so we're already at a much lower growth rate. That's a projection of Australia's labour force growth on two assumptions. NOM means net overseas migration. If net overseas migration to Australia was zero, our labour force would be falling about now, beginning to fall about now, and it would remain, these are rates of growth, so it's not the size of the labour force, it's the rate of growth. So, and from now onwards we would have a negative rate of growth of the labour force, so the labour force would keep dwindling without migration. The blue line, that's the red line, the blue line assumes 160,000 immigrants coming into Australia every year, net. That is a little below the most recent number, which was closer to 180,000. And you see, even with a high migration assumption like that, high by historical standard in Australia, the labour force growth rate continues to fall. That does remain positive. But it falls to levels that we haven't seen for almost forever in Australia, down to 0.5 or so annual growth. Now, we have to adjust to declining labour force growth, and the rest of the world's got to do that as well. But adjusting to fairly rapid negative growth is not something which is very likely to be successful. This is another kind of hypothetical scenario. Suppose you wanted to keep Australia's labour force growth at 1%. Then The annual net migration that you would need is on the right-hand side there, going up from where it is now up to about 220,000 for most of this period, but later on rising even more again. And the population impact is fairly substantial, very substantial impact. 20 million in 2006 to 36 million in 2051. Now, I'm not saying that that's what we should be aiming at. All I'm saying is that if you are on the logic that I'm putting forward, migration is going to be relatively high, and we are going to be looking at populations well over 30 million, or around 30 million by 2050. In the next 50 years, because of very low birth rates, skilled labour will be the quintessential scarce resource. This is not to say the world as a whole should be aiming to increase its population, far from it, but it does mean there will be redistribution of population across the globe on a numerical scale greater than we have ever seen. Now, we saw a lot of redistribution of population in the 19th century, but in numerical terms, what's going to happen now, and is already happening, is going to be greater than we've ever seen, the movement of people around the world.